What is up, everyone? Renfail here, and we are back with another EverQuest 2 gameplay guide. And today's guide is all about what is the best class to solo in EverQuest 2. And some of you who have been playing the game for a long time are going to go, are you staffed? What's up with you? Because every class can solo in EverQuest 2 if we're talking traditional classic servers, especially with the introduction of mercenaries. Everyone can solo the game through dungeons even. So what do you mean, what's the best class to solo when every class can go out there and do that pretty effectively? Well, what I like to do, if you've ever watched any of my other game guides, is I like to focus on my favorite classes to solo, sort of my subjective view of what I think is the number one best, because there is a number one at the end of this video. Even though I am going to talk about several of my favorite classes to solo, there is a number one slot, in my opinion, for the best class to solo in this game. But there are some caveats to that, and I like to take you on the journey since I've been playing this game since it originally launched. I don't even remember when it launched, 2004 or something like that. It was a long time ago. Very long time ago. In any case, if you've never watched one of these videos before, here's one of the most important things you need to understand. One is that this is an opinion-based video, which means it's very subjective. I am not the de facto best player, best guide creator on EverQuest 2. You might find other people's opinions to be more to your liking. So you might also be watching this video and, but what about this, that, or the other? Feel free to drop those in the comments below. I'm more than happy to talk about all things related to EverQuest 2. It's a great game. It's been around for a long time. There's lots of different ways to play this game. And the other thing to keep in mind is that I don't show any combat in these videos, and the reason for that is because if you want to watch combat videos, you can either watch my individual class guides for EverQuest 2, or you can go watch one of the hundreds, yes, hundreds of live streams of this game that I have created here on my channel over the years. You'll get plenty of combat in those places. This is just to talk about my favorite classes and why I think they might be the best choice for you in terms of what's the best class to solo in this game. So without further ado, let's actually get into the game guide section of this. Let's talk about the classes, get to my number one. Don't forget, you can always check out the chapter listing below if you want to skip ahead, although hopefully you don't skip ahead because there's a lot of fun information in this guide as we go through. Anyways, let's get into the guide today. So the easiest way to approach this, I have found over the years, is to just go straight into the archetypes and break it down from there, because each archetype has a variety of classes within it. All of them are viable, as I mentioned, but at the end of the day, I always think that there are one or two that stand out as sort of the best in terms of solo ability, and that's just based on personal preference and the way I think that the game's played these days with a mercenary at your side. Now, if you're going to be playing with a group, it will change that dynamic slightly, and I am going to talk about that a little bit in today's video when we talk about why I'm making the decisions I'm making. So for me, when I look at the fighter archetype, there are a couple of things that I would choose if I were going into this and picking the best solo class. Now, I have played a Guardian for many years, since the launch of the game, and back in the day the Guardian was so horrible with DPS that you really had to have other people with you to make up for it, which is one of the reasons why I'm not actually going to be talking about the Guardian in today's video. If you're talking about solo class, what's the best solo fighter in the game, I'm going to say Shadowknight 100% of the way. The Paladin might be an option for some people, but the reason I don't focus on the Paladin so much is because even though the Paladin has some self-heals and the survivability is there, the DPS just isn't there, and it's you can make up for that with a Mercenary, but the Shadowknight takes the cake for me, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you look at the right-hand side, Shadowknights are malevolent crusaders who wreak fear, hate, and despair upon all who would oppose them, and in addition to their formidable martial skills, they can conjure dark magic with which they can enhance their abilities and drain the life force of their enemies. Okay, the best part about Shadowknights is they have AoE abilities that far surpass anything that the Paladin or the Guardian is going to bring into play. The Berserker has some stuff that's close, but the reason I think the Shadowknight is the best option here is because the Shadowknight gets that life tap ability, especially you get the AoE life tap abilities, and when you get into the alternate advancement and everything else, you can make the Shadowknight this AoE DPSing tank machine that just destroys everything in its path, especially when they're combined with like a Fury as a healing companion, or even a Warden as a healing companion. I think those are going to be, just in my mind, that combo makes the Shadowknight the best tank to play, the best solo class to play in the game in terms of tanking. Now, if you're going to be playing with a group and you have a group at your background and you have a regular static group of players, it's either going to be the Guardian or the Paladin. And the reason I say either or is because it's kind of depend on whether or not you want to be a frontline mitigation tank who doesn't do a ton of DPS but has just tons of mitigation and a shield, and you're just up there in the front. The Guardian is going to be the choice for you. But if you like to be sort of the, oh, I have a backup heal and a little bit of utility and some nice spells at my disposal, the Paladin can be quite helpful, especially when you start looking at it as a secondary mitigation tank, especially with the men's being able to focus the threat on other targets. It's a great sort of backup tank in your group. But that's sort of grouping. We're talking here solo. So in my mind, the solo class for fighters is the Shadowknight. 100% wins the day for the best tanking solo class fighter out there. That's just my personal preference. I love the Shadowknight. I think it's great. I normally don't like to play evil classes in games, but the Shadowknight is amazing, especially like if you've never played an Ixar Shadowknight. They are so cool looking when you start getting them decked out in the Shadowknight armor and all of the abilities and everything else. It's chef's kiss. Next up are the priests. Now, priests traditionally didn't have really any DPS at their disposal when we're talking about when the game launched. The exception to that were sort of the Inquisitor, Fury, and Defiler. It was a weird scenario when the game first launched where the good guys, which were the Templar, Warden, and Mystic, kind of were focused more on heals and less on DPS, whereas the Inquisitor, Fury, and Defiler had a little bit more DPS and less heals. It was a weird scenario. But these days, everybody heals equally well. It's just how do they heal. If you look at the top, your Templars and your Inquisitors are going to be more based on your direct heals and some other stuff. The Warden and Fury are more heal over times, and then the Mystic and Defiler are more of the wards, so they absorb damage. And I realize it's a very gross overgeneralization of what they do, but that's just the basis of things. These days, if I had to pick the best solo priest out there, I'm going to have to go with the Warden. And it's a tie for me sometimes between like the Fury and the Warden. The reason I'm going to pick the Warden, though, is because the way that the class has changed over the years. And again, this could change next year. We don't know. As of 2023, this edition, the Warden takes the cake for this. And it's because the Warden has evolved into this amazing heal over time character who also can do a ton of melee DPS and can just wait out there and pull waves and waves of mobs and decimate them while remaining alive. It's a really cool blend of melee and healing, and it's pretty awesome. What's really interesting is if you go try to play the Warden on like a TLE server, one of the new progression servers, if you've played a Warden on the live server and then you go do that, you're taken back 20 years in time, and all of a sudden your Warden has no DPS and you're literally just a heal bot, and the early stages of the game are super difficult unless you've got friends with you who are doing all the DPS, because you just can't. If you've watched any of the streams from like the last TLE that was last year, I think, I don't remember what it's called now. Not the one that just launched, which is the PvP one, the PvE one. Like I was duoing with a Paladin, and we were trying to do these heroic mobs, and it was taking us like 10 minutes to kill a heroic mob on the TLE servers because the DPS was just not there, because the Paladin is not a DPS tank back in the day, and the Warden was not a DPS class back in the day. But these days, on the classic servers, in the live version of the game, the Warden is absolutely hands down the best of the priests in terms of solo ability, in my opinion, just because of the amount of mobs they can pull and how quickly you can chew through mobs and everything else. And it's awesome. It really is an amazing opportunity. Now, the Fury is a close second in my mind, because of the fact that it does some really good single target DPS. But either one of these, I'm gonna have to pick the Warden if I had to pick between the two of them. And just in terms of mercenary, just pick a good DPS merc, or one of the Shadowknight mercenary or the Paladin mercenary. I would go with the Shadowknight mercenary personally, and just go out there and wreck mobs as you level up. It's pretty amazing what you can do. Hey everyone, Renfail here with the commercial part of the video where I say, hey, if you like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And thanks to all of our supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, our highest members, our guild champions, Crazy's Relative, Remy D here on YouTube. And don't forget, if you want to support, it's really easy. You can do the memberships below, the Adventurers Guild, 3 different tiers. There's also the super thanks on any uploaded video or YouTube short that you find. There's also, of course, the super chats and stickers that you could do on any live stream or premiere, and the Patreon page if you want to dive into the fantasy world that I have with my brother and my wife, which is a tabletop game, a point-and-click adventure game, and a fantasy book series. All are great ways to keep this channel going and me going full-time. Thanks again for those of you who support. Let's get back to the video that you're watching now. Now, the debate here is always going to be what is the best caster class, and it kind of just depends on what you like to do. If you just want to stand around and nuke stuff, then you're probably going to want to go with the wizard. But that's not my choice for the best solo mage. That's going to come down to one of the pet classes, and you really have to make a decision here between conjurer and necromancer. And it really is, in my mind, it's going to be a balance between, do you want to be using a variety of different types of pets that are situational, in which case you can go with the traditional conjurer because you've got an earth pet, an air pet, water pet, so on and so forth, or do you want to be doing crazy amounts of DPS but needing to worry about life taps and things of that nature, in which case you would go with the necromancer. This is going to be another one of those rare scenarios where I almost never play evil races in other games or evil classes in other games, but in EverQuest 2, I'm going to go with the necromancer as one of the best solo mages out there because of the amount of DPS they do in terms of dots and AoEs, and some of it depends on how you spec your AoE, your AA, your alternate advancement. But if you're looking for something that just mows things down and has a pet that backs it up, the necromancer is a really good option. Now, the pets in my mind are not as tanky as the pets for the conjurer. So if you want like something that has a little more classic, tank and spank pet that's going to protect you while you do spells, then the conjurer is going to be more to your style. But the necromancer in my mind is the best option because it's literally just, you can just start mowing things down. And if you've ever gone through and done like the agnostic dungeons, which we'll talk about in another video, walking into an agnostic dungeon with a necromancer is just, it's sheer chaos because you just let your pet go and then just pull tons of mobs and just rain down AoE fire and kill everything with damage over time stuff. It's really, really amazing. So the necromancer is a lot of fun in EverQuest 2. Interestingly enough, the necromancer is the only class I have ever tried PvP with in EverQuest 2. I traditionally don't like PvP, but I did try PvP way back in the day, and I used a necromancer to do so. And I actually got up into the mid-20s. This is way back, like when the game first came out, and quite enjoyed it. I was playing with an ex-partner at the time, and she had an inquisitor. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, necromancer takes the cake for me. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say that the best scout in terms of soloing is the Beast Lord. And that's definitely a valid option for those of you who like to have a pet at your disposal. And the Beast Lord is really kind of amazing in this game. However, I am a big fan of the following class, and the reason I saved this for last is because it is my favorite. This is the class I would think that is the best solo class out of all of them out there. It's personal opinion only, of course. And this is because this was the very first class I played when I originally played EverQuest 1. And it was not the first class I played in EverQuest 2, but it was a class that I gravitated over time and eventually had an alt of, and I'm playing another alt of this as I do the game guides that I'm currently working on here in 2023 here on my channel, and that is the Ranger. The Ranger is a lot of fun, a lot of fun in EverQuest 2. And in my mind, it's the best solo class out there just because of the amount of DPS that you do with ranged, whether it's single target or AoE. You can do damage when things are up close and personal as well. You get the run speed buff, which doesn't really mean that much when everybody gets mounts, but if you're talking about like looking at the way it's been played over the years, and if you ever go back and play it on a TLE server, the Ranger is always going to stand out. Now, it doesn't necessarily have the best DPS in the Scout category. I would say that even to this day, the Assassin is going to have the best DPS out of all of these, but that's highly dependent on you being in a group and having somebody distracting the mobs so that you can attack from behind. Again, that's sort of solved these days with having a good mercenary at your disposal, because if you get like the Shadowknight or the Paladin mercenary, they can hold aggro extremely well and allow you to remain behind the mob and do plenty of damage from behind. But I'm always going to go with that Ranger option because it is from a distance. It's a fun class to play. They look really good. And doesn't matter what class or what race you're playing, they look really good, and it's just fun to have a bow and just be pew 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 pew. But again, highly subjective because that's just my personal opinion. And if I actually had to go and choose between two, I would probably say it's a toss-up between the Necromancer and the Ranger, because both are really, really fun for me to play. But I think at the end of the day, the Ranger wins for me, like it does in most games. Not every game, but most games I play, the Ranger takes. I mean, the Lord of the Rings Online, it was the Hunter. You know, the Hunter takes the cake for me in Lord of the Rings Online. And if you look at like, I haven't done the Star Wars Old Republic guide yet, but I'll tell you, the Gunslinger is my favorite there, which is essentially a dual-wielding ranged class. So it's weird because I spent my raiding career as a main tank, and I love the tanks, but from a sheer soloing standpoint, not a group, not playing as a group, not playing as the guild leader, not playing as the raid leader, playing from a solo's perspective, I really loved those. I love those ranged archer classes. So that's my take. So there you have it, everyone. That is my what is the best solo class in EverQuest 2, which for some people might be a redundant guide because every class can solo, and I realize that that's your opinion, and that's a valid. Everybody has the right to have an opinion, but I love putting these videos out because lots of people do like to solo, and everyone wants to hear about the different ways that you can solo and what are some of the best classes to solo with. Following this up, I'll be doing some other game guides on like the best mercenaries to pair up with your characters and so on and so forth. So if you like that kind of stuff, make sure to follow along. Don't forget to check out the live streams, and I'll see everybody in the next video. Until then, stay safe and happy adventuring in Norath.